Hey there. Today's topic is called the immediacy of separation. It's kind of based on the chapter 26, section 8 in the course, which is called the Immediacy of Salvation. But I thought it would be interesting to bring back the separation, that moment of separation, that when we took the TinyMed idea seriously. And throughout this channel, we kind of spoke about it as if this was a long time ago, right? That it happened over millions of years, and we are here now after this long period of time. However, with the course, we learn to look at it a little differently, which is that the separation from God, from our source, from our home, happens right now, or happens any second of the day. And we can take any example we want. For example, I was meeting somebody, and I had an immediate aversion against this person. It happens to me, and I know it by now that for me, the first impression is not true. For me, the first impression is wrong, and it says in the course, the ego speaks first. The ego always speaks first, and it's wrong. So I usually let that sit. I don't try to overpower it. My first impression is usually a judgment of some kind, and I let that sit and look at it and ask for help and stuff like that. But it's so interesting because, so if we think about the introduction to the text that says, paragraph 2 says, nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. The love that flows between us and another person, because it's one mind, is continuous, right? And for us, as we are mostly identified with the ego, our default state is that of judgment, or of what the course calls oblivion. That means we don't know that we're judging. What we're not feeling is a complete, all-encompassing love for not only the person that we are in front of, but for everything and everybody. It's a completely different experience. And Jesus says, I want to lead you, or I will lead you to a completely different experience. It is unlike anything we have ever experienced, other than here and there a tiny, tiny little wisp of a melody, as the Course says. So that state, though, that's our natural state. So if we are in the grocery store, or if we meet somebody, the natural state that we would be in would be all-encompassing love. And then, because we're so afraid of that, the ego is so afraid of that joining or of the oneness, because in oneness it cannot exist, right? It's almost like we're going to a rock concert and we need a ticket to get in. Without a ticket, we can't get in. And the ego can't get into heaven because the heaven is oneness, and the ego is the thought of separation. So the ego cannot enter heaven. And we can only enter into heaven without the ego. So the separation, the thought of separation, we are afraid of that unity. And just to bring it down to our level in the world, we're afraid of our brother and our sister. because they are the same mind as us, and our ego is afraid for us to just join with them, because we are joined, right? We are joined by default, and we are putting blocks, like the introduction says, the blocks to the awareness of love's presence. We put blocks in between. We project our guilt, our belief in sin. We make the other different. We make us better. We make the other better, and so on. So we put those obstacles in between us. So let's say we meet somebody in a grocery store. Our default setting would be truth, right? Would be love. Our default setting. And then the tiny mad idea happens, and that tiny mad idea says, what if there's more than that oneness? And we acknowledge, or we say, okay, what if there is more? And the ego comes in and says, you are now an individual, and that is a sin. But that happens in the grocery store. When we have this reaction against somebody, we have separated from that other person. Our mind has split off from the other mind, from the same mind, at that very moment. The separation happens right then and there. And then we project our guilt onto the other person, and we feel maybe we feel repelled, or we have a judgment. But this judgment doesn't come arbitrarily. This judgment comes because we wanted to be separate from the other person. At that very moment, we have gone through the separation. We have, as the Course says, we relive over and over again the moment when terror took the place of love. So we're in the grocery store, and at that very moment, we separate, seemingly, from God, because our brother and our sister is the reflection of how we feel about God. That's how we see our brother and sister. So the separation didn't happen millions of years ago. The separation happens, we go through this whole ego thought system, right? Believe in sin, guilt, projection and attack. Then we perceive something outside that is sinful, so we're innocent. That happens over and over and over again because we relive the original separation every day, every hour, every second of the day, unless we decide for the Holy Spirit. So the separation happens right now, at this very moment, when we watch this video, or at this moment when I talk. I can believe in the tiny mad idea that says separation is true, or I can go to the Holy Spirit and ask for the correction for that. But it happens right now. It didn't happen millions of years ago. That's the trick of the ego that says time is real and it takes a long time to overcome it. Where in truth, this very moment when we separate from the person at the register in the supermarket, right? Or our partner, our loved one, or our children, our parents, or the bus driver. That moment when we separate from them, when we make them different, that's the separation. There is no other separation. The fact that we have done it a million times before only matters to the ego, because it says, look, you've done it, you cannot change your future. The future will be like the past. And we overlook the present moment, and in the present moment, we can undo the separation when we go to the Holy Spirit. So we just relive this original separation from God right now. And Jesus says in the Course that at no single instant does the body exist at all. So the body only exists in the future or in the past. And we feel our body because we want to make the separation real, and the body is the symbol for the separation. It shows us, it's proof the separation has occurred when we feel our body through any kind of emotion or through any kind of physical stuff. But it's now. It's not that it happened a long time ago. It is right now. It's happening at this very moment. And there was a workshop that Ken did, and I can't remember what the name was, but he would always say, and now it's 2:45 on a Saturday afternoon. Right now, salvation is here. We can choose it right now at this very moment, not in the future. And he was saying that several times over the course of 2-hour period in the afternoon. Right now, at this very moment, we can choose salvation, which is the immediacy of salvation, that it's right now. At the same time, the separation also always only happens right now. It does not happen in the future. And it did not happen in the past. It's always just this one moment that we decide again against God, and again against God, and again against God. So in one sense, what happens in the process of the Course over a long period of time is to shorten the future and the past, to get closer and closer to this one moment, and to live throughout our day and always come back to this one moment. Okay, if I have a reaction to somebody, it is because I want the separation now, right now. As I'm looking at the other person, that's when the whole separation happens. And we have discussed this in one of the chapters, in one of the sections, and it says here, future loss is not your fear, but present joining is your dread. We're going to the supermarket and we dread joining with others, because that means our ego is gone, and our ego cannot let that happen, right? So as long as we're identified with our ego, we must make the judgment real, and we must keep the separation going. So present joining is your dread. We go into the supermarket and we dread the love that would be so all-encompassing and enveloping everyone in the supermarket. We would see absolutely beautiful people, we wouldn't see people, we would see everybody would just be utterly beautiful and totally loved, totally loving. And that's what we dread. Present joining is your dread, right? We dread that. So we have to come up with reasons why we judge them, because we dread joining. I think that's a really helpful thing to recognize about ourselves, how big our fear is of just going to a place and joining with somebody that we don't know, and not excluding anybody, right? It's easy to join with one group that we identify with, but joining with anybody, we dread it. And I think part of the Course process is for us to realize that we dread it. You know, So the separation happens now, but the solution, the correction, is also always present. And for me, the looking at my resistance against that joining with anybody, I think yesterday I had like 5 or 6 situations where I was immediately judging, and I could not even remotely do anything about it. The only thing I could do was, okay, I want to judge them because I want to make the separation real. And I asked for help. And at night when I was lying in bed, I kind of went through all the situations and realized that, I almost felt like it was a wasted day. But then obviously Jesus says it's never a wasted day when you can always look at it with me, even if it's after, even 5 years later. You can always look back at something with Jesus and feel that you did the maximum of what you could do that day, right? Because the fear is so great. The dread of this joining is so great that sometimes we just can't do anything about it. So, but the correction is always present. Even if it's 5 years later, it's almost like I envision it that when we make a mistake, let's say we judge somebody, that judgment is like a person that walks next to us, right? That's called judgment. At the same time that judgment appears, the correction appears on the other side. So we never are alone only with our mistake, with our judgment, with our projection, with our anger, with our yelling at somebody. We never are alone with just that. On the other side, I'm going to switch that because, so this is the judgment, and this would be the correction of the Holy Spirit. So whenever there's a judgment, there's also at the very same time the correction for that. It's walking next to us. If we did if we made a big mistake 10 years ago, all this time the correction was walking beside us. And Jesus said, I will never leave you comfortless. And comfort means to know that the correction for whatever we've done is always there. It's not that we have to do things about it, or it's in the future or 100 miles away and we have to catch up with it. It's there right now. As this section says, the immediacy of salvation. The separation is immediate, right? Every day, right now, this is the separation. But salvation is the same instant. Because the same instant the tiny mad idea happened that said there's more than God, the correction happened that said, no, there cannot be more than God. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Oneness cannot be divided. Right? The correction is always right there. For me, it was always helpful, or it is always helpful, to remind myself that salvation is not in the future. It's not like, oh, when I've done enough with this course, when I've practiced enough, then I'll feel better. That might be true, but it's not necessary. The salvation or the correction is with us right at this very moment. It's literally the turn of our head. We look at the ego, we look at the problem, and of everything we do, and the projections, and the anger, and the fear, and all the special love, special hate relationships. At the very same time, the corrections are here also. Jesus walks with us forever. There's no distance between us and him. But the correction is always in our mind right now. Just as the thought of separation is immediate, so is the thought of correction that Jesus represents also immediate. And he says here at the end of this section, he says, be not content with future happiness, right? It has no meaning and it is not your just reward, for you have cause for freedom now. Right now, we could be free of everything we think we did, of everything that bothers us, right at this very moment. The only thing that stops us from accepting the correction is that we dread to be joined with Jesus. We're afraid of this comfort, of his comfort. I remember Gloria Wapnick at a workshop in Roscoe. She would say, so what if there's a button in front of you? One of those Staples buttons, and you could press it right now and you would be home. Because that's what Jesus says. He says the salvation is immediate right now. You have cause for freedom now, not in the future. You can be free right now. Why aren't you pushing the button? She did really great exercises and visuals. Another one was, we would walk on the beach and we would see a figure with his arms open like this, walking towards us. And it would be Jesus. And the reactions were amazing, from breaking out in tears to utter terror. It's good to come in contact with this, this is not a theoretical concept. The dread of joining is the death of the ego, and as long as we're identified with the ego, we cannot join. That's why this is a very slow process from being so fully engaged with the ego that says we're separated and there's no turning back for you. It is done. You have killed God and it is done. Right? 2, you can be free right now. You are fully forgiven. Nothing has happened at all. God is not angry. Love has not changed. Oneness cannot be divided. Nothing real can be threatened, and you are real. And the relationship between you and God is real. This cannot be threatened. But we're so engaged with the ego, so 100% identified that we can only go over this way a millisecond. The first year, a millisecond. The second year, 2 milliseconds. The third year, 2.5 milliseconds. Then we go the fourth year, we go back to 1 millisecond because we're like, oh my God, this is crazy. This is scary. So it's a long process, but the salvation or the correction for anything we think is immediate. The immediacy of salvation, it is right here. The moment we think separate thoughts, the same moment the correction appears. It's not a vacuum. One cannot appear without the other, right? This pops up, this has to pop up. It can never just be this, because time is already over. Anything that we have ever thought of is done, and the correction for anything we have ever thought of is there. So a thought about our guilt pops up immediately. The thought that we're forgiven is right there next to us. And Jesus represents that thought. And for me, it's always so important to establish that relationship with Jesus because it is so personal. If you can start establishing that relationship, it makes the salvation, that thought of correction, very personal. It's not just a concept, I am forgiven, but it's this presence of love within our mind. And it's just its presence says you're forgiven. If this presence exists within us, the separation cannot have happened, which means there cannot be sin, there cannot be guilt, there cannot be fear. None of the whole ego thought system exists. All right, I think that's all I have for today. And I will see you next time.